Hello and welcome back to Taboo Talks with me, Catherine Daniels.
And me, Beth Ennis.
This is our monthly podcast where we discuss the topics we've covered in the past few weeks. This month we've been busy looking into vaccines, LGBT lessons in schools, gun laws and more. We've been looking at various points of views that people have been expressing about these topics on social media, and we want to hear from you too. Send your comments into our social media channels or email us at contact.us.taboo@gmail.com.
Let's jump straight into the first topic then, which is vaccines. If you've been following us closely over the last few months, you might remember when we stirred up some controversy on Twitter about vaccinations. Vaccines are very topical at the minute and they are making a lot of headlines because there does seem to be a rise in the number of people who call themselves anti-vaxxers. Anti-vaxxers are people who believe that vaccinating causes issues including autism, so they choose not to vaccinate themselves and their children. They think this because of a paper that was released years ago connecting autism to vaccinations. This has widely been disputed since, and the scientist has been shunned by the entire scientific community, but nevertheless there is this kind of remaining attitude from some people that vaccinations are dangerous. So on Twitter we reached out to a medical professional to ask if they were interested in speaking about vaccinations and people who don't believe they work. But this resulted in us getting a few comments questioning why we were even writing the article in the first place. So we had Justin Payne who said, "There's an enormous body of research proving that raising the profile of harmful, wrong ideas by writing articles that refute them actually has the reverse effect of promoting those ideas." So Catherine and I worked on this article together and we did a lot of research on it and found out about many different viewpoints on it. What did you make of what Justin said, Catherine?
Well, Beth, I think it's an interesting argument saying that if you talk about harmful ideas that it actually promotes them, but I think sometimes it is important to write about these views that obviously are dangerous views in not having vaccinations, to refute them completely and to say why they are dangerous. And I think that talking about them is a way to discredit them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, they're going to be spreading this message on whatever platforms they choose to spread it on, that vaccines don't work. So there needs to be a voice of reason and articles exploring why they do work and why that is completely absurd. So I don't actually see a problem with covering it at all. And I think the way that we did cover it, we weren't, saying that it was a balanced argument between anti-vax and vax. We weren't saying, oh yeah, you choose your side. We were refuting what the anti-vaxxers were saying with proven science.
Well, yeah, that's very true. We sort of looked at why they argue the way they do, but then argue against that in, I think, what you can say is a fair way, because we're not promoting these harmful ideas and we wouldn't want to promote these harmful ideas, because I think there are some topics that aren't really debatable in a sense, because vaccines work. Vaccines are a way to stop disease, and by not having a vaccine, you're putting not only yourself at risk, but also the risk of entire populations. When we were researching the article, I found out an interesting statistic that 95% of the population needs to be vaccinated to create what's called herd immunity, to stop these dangerous diseases and illnesses and to sort of let the diseases die out. But when people aren't vaccinated, this herd immunity dies off, and it means that elderly people or very young people or ill people are now much more at risk because one person has decided to not get vaccinated because of a misled belief.
I think that's really interesting as well, because we have heard of cases now where, for example, a baby will pass away because of contracting a disease from someone who hasn't been vaccinated, and that baby's not had the chance to be immunised yet, and they've died as a result of someone else choosing not to get vaccinated. So it's a massive public health problem, and I just think that it's really dangerous to spread this idea that they don't work and that they're harmful.
And in fact, the World Health Organization has named vaccine hesitancy as one of their 10 threats to global health in 2019, which I think really does show how big of an issue anti-vaccination has become and how much of a threat it actually is towards our public health. And I think that that is actually really worrying in itself.
I'm sure there are people in countries that don't have as good access to vaccinations who will be absolutely mortified by the fact that people who are lucky enough to have access to them are saying no. Sometimes I just think that's really weird. So we had another comment from Lisa who said, The argument against vaccination focuses on the possible side effects of them, but ignores the side effects of not vaccinating. And of course, we know that the side effects of not vaccinating can mean serious illnesses that can actually end up in death. So this ideology is really, really damaging, and it definitely does need to be put to rest.
Well, yeah, I think I've seen also statistics that say in some countries, measles, for example, has been eradicated or nearly eradicated, and I think it's in some states of America, and it's because people haven't been vaccinating, there's actually been outbreaks of this disease again, which we were close to getting rid of, and I just think that that's so ridiculous, considering that back in sort of the 1700s vaccines were created and there was backlash at the time, people didn't believe it and things like that, but people have sort of got over that so that vaccines were more common, actually got rid of some diseases, like we don't have smallpox anymore, for example, because of vaccines, and now there's just a group of people that all of a sudden have believed this one incorrect scientific study, and because of that they're putting everybody's lives at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key word that you said there is ridiculous, because the whole thing just, to me, seems ridiculous to have these medieval illnesses coming back that we'd nearly wiped out. And also, you know, I've seen some arguments from people on Twitter. I saw something the other day, someone saying literally the plague went away without vaccines, and someone just replied, yeah, but it wiped out a third of Europe in the process. These illnesses don't go away without vaccines. It's scientifically proven that they work. We've seen them massively drop after vaccinations, and now we're seeing them go back up after people have stopped accepting vaccinations, so there's clearly a pattern there.
And there's no real logical argument against vaccinating, because as we've already touched on, this one study that said that the MMR jab led to autism has been widely disproved. It's not real, it doesn't cause autism. The research wasn't done properly and things like that, and it's just not true, and I think the study was then retracted because it's a dangerous thing to publish. But why do people still believe in it?
I know, I think it's just almost like jumping on the bandwagon if they want to believe something's not true. It's almost like a conspiracy theory, isn't it? I think we could probably talk about this for ages and go on to all the different points that have been made, but we'd be here for hours, I think. So if you do have any comments about vaccines, or if you know anyone who's an anti-vaxxer and you have any comments, please get in touch with us on social media in the usual ways, or contact us via email.
So let's move on to our next topic. We've covered another topical taboo, which is about LGBT lessons in school, and this is something that's got quite a bit of backlash on social media recently. So Beth, would you like to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, well, this is something that's very topical in the UK at the minute, after a primary school in Birmingham started their No Outsiders initiative, where they spoke to children about gay couples. All it was they used a picture book to show children that there were different types of family, so there can be same-sex couples with children, that kind of thing. It received a lot of backlash from parents who largely use religion as the excuse for not wanting their children to take part in these lessons. There were protests held outside the school, children were withdrawn from lessons until this initiative was put on hold. So this has definitely sparked a lot of debate across the country. People have been sending their comments in on social media in response to news stories about the topic. Some people really disagree that children should be taught about LGBT issues at such a young age, and others are saying that it's absolutely ridiculous. What do you make of this, Catherine?
Well, I think children should be taught about all the different types of families. There should be inclusivity within schools, and I think equal representation within learning about families and different types of families should be normalised, because now there are children that might have two dads or two mums, or they might, if they feel that way themselves, they might be sat there thinking, oh, well, why am I just being taught that you can only have a mum and a dad in a family when I've got two dads, for example? And then they might feel left out or bullied and things like that. And I think if they've got a school book that literally has a picture in it where it's a mum and a dad, two dads and two mums, what's the harm in that? Because these relationships are becoming more normal and more accepted, and I think that we should be progressing, and I don't understand why children shouldn't be allowed to see that. But how would you feel if you were taught about these issues within school?
I think it's really important. I don't think the value of lessons like this should be underestimated, because I think they can have a real impact on children as they grow up. Obviously, at that age, they're not going to be thinking about who they're attracted to, and rightly so, they shouldn't be. They should just be focusing on being a kid. But I think I didn't have anything like that growing up, and I didn't really know of any gay people until I was much older, and when I finally realised that being gay was actually a thing, that's when it clicked with me. Oh, that makes sense then. But I just think it's really poor that religion and the children's age is being used as the reason for these protests. I actually think it's a really poor guise for homophobia, and I just don't agree with it at all.
Well, that's the thing. I suppose they're saying that children are too young to learn that you could have two mums or two dads, but they're not too young to learn that you can have a mother and a father. And sometimes you get the whole thing when little kids are playing together and it's like, oh, is that your boyfriend to a little girl? Or is that your girlfriend to a little boy? And they normalise, obviously, children thinking those sorts when they shouldn't. I think for any 5-year-old to be thinking, oh, I'll have a relationship is weird, no matter who it's with. And I think things like that, obviously, are too young. But why not say, well, some people have two mums, and that's fine.
Exactly. I think a lot of the parents who are saying that it's forcing LGBT values, or my favourite one, the gay agenda on young children, is just absolutely... I have no words for it, but they're the same people who are saying things to these children like, oh, is that your boyfriend? Have you seen your boyfriend today at school? And, you know, in other ways forcing heterosexuality on children from a young age, such as Disney movies always have heterosexual couples in, that kind of thing, and that's never frowned on. And seeing heterosexual couples kiss and all of that kind of thing isn't frowned on, and yet you see a picture of a same-sex couple holding hands in a picture book, and suddenly that's, you know, enforcing the gay agenda. I just think it's absolutely ludicrous. So one of the signs that a lot of the protesters were holding read, "Say no to promoting homosexuality and LGBT ways of life to our children." So obviously that's suggesting that these lessons are telling children that they should be gay, which I really don't think they are. Like we said, it was just a picture book. But interestingly, a lot of these parents who were holding these very signs have come out and said that they're actually not homophobic, which that also to me just seems really absurd. You can't say in one breath, stop showing children that gay people exist, and then in the next breath say, I'm not homophobic.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. If they're not homophobic, surely they should have no problem with their kids learning about that type of lifestyle.
Exactly. I think we would probably all agree that there's no need to be talking about sexual relationships to children of that age, because that comes at a later point. That's not what that school was trying to achieve from what I can see. They were just trying to show children that there are different types of families, and I actually think doing something like that with children at such a young age will probably prevent prejudice and hate crimes as they get older, because they'll be like, oh no, that's not weird, I've seen that from such a young age that it doesn't shock me to see two men holding hands or two women holding hands.
And of course, when they grow older themselves, if they had those feelings and sort of maybe thinking that they were gay, at least then they know that it is normal and it is obviously acceptable, and they know what's going on, and they don't have to feel that shame or embarrassment that some people have to go through because it hasn't been normalised where they are.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
And if you want to get in touch with your comments about this topic, you can send in all of your thoughts to our social media or our email.
So let's move on to our next topic, which is gun laws in America. Catherine has been looking into these laws in America and has written a Topical Taboo opinion piece on it. Tell us more, Catherine.
Well, as we know, in America, gun laws are very controversial, and there's always a lot of heated debate between those who want gun laws to change and those who don't. This basically all comes down to the Second Amendment in the US Constitution, which does actually allow citizens to own guns. And it says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, this document was actually written in the 18th century during a time of civil war, when guns were no more powerful than a musket, which takes a long time to load, not very powerful, very unreliable, things like this. And it doesn't take into account the fact that people now are owning semi-automatic rifles, which can kill a lot of people in a very short space of time and are more commonly seen in actual battlefields. In America, there are always a lot of shootings and mass shootings, And actually in 2018, there were over 340 shootings in the country. And this is the only country in the world where this happens, pretty much the only country that has a shooting and doesn't seem to change its gun laws.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's almost a shooting for every day of the year. It's unbelievable. And you have instances in other countries where there has been shootings and immediately we've seen changes to gun laws. So the most recent example is probably New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah, so in New Zealand in March, there was a shooting in a mosque, and I think it was around 50 people were killed in that instance. And the following day, their Prime Minister said, we're going to make gun laws stricter. And they've decided to change their gun laws to make it harder to get guns, make it harder to own guns, put in stricter background tests, all that sort of thing. And that was from one shooting. They said, right, that's awful, we don't want that to happen again. And in England, there was a case in Dunblane where there was a school shooting, and immediately after, England were like, right, no, we're changing our gun laws. This isn't happening again. And America, it seems there's a mass shooting, it goes through the same cycle. Oh, this can't happen again, thoughts and prayers. Oh, but we're not actually going to change anything. And then a few months go by, oh, look, there's another mass shooting. And I just think it's awful.
It is absolutely shocking. I mean, you see headlines like, does America care about its children after shootings like this? Because nothing happens. It is the same rigmarole every time of, oh, thoughts and prayers, this is really tragic. It's not tragic. There is something that can be done to stop it. So why aren't they taking that step?
And there are, in fact, quite a lot of school shootings, and I know there's been suggestions that why don't we arm teachers instead? But in an active shooting situation, that's just going to confuse the situation a lot more. If a teacher's not trained to use a gun, what good is that going to do? But also, there's not enough funding for teachers to buy necessary supplies for school. So what sort of funding is going to give them all a gun? And I think giving live guns in classrooms is just going to be so much more dangerous. I think the only real way to stop school shootings is to get rid of guns.
Exactly. The American logic on this just seems really flawed. I mean, not every American thinks like that, obviously, we know that, but it just seems so weird to say, oh, let's solve the gun problem by giving out more guns. It's just not the way to handle it at all. They should be trying to stop access to guns that can cause that much devastation that quickly, rather than being like, oh, here's more guns to solve the gun problem. It's just unbelievable.
And it's got to the point where people can be scared to go to school, scared to get an education, scared to go to the cinema or the shopping centre or to work, because there's been so many mass shootings in all of these places. And how is that allowed? How is that acceptable? It's just, I think it's horrific. And actually, one of the stats that I found out when I was doing research for this is that 7 of the deadliest mass shootings in the US since 1949 have happened in the last 4 years.
Yeah, that is just unbelievable, isn't it? I keep saying that word, but that's what it is, because why keep allowing this to happen? Why not take the lead from the New Zealand Prime Minister, who immediately after an attack like that happened, she was like, no, this shouldn't be happening in our country. We don't want people's lives to be at risk.
And I think one of the problems with it is it's written in the Constitution, and constitutions are notoriously hard to change. So it's not just like a normal bill that's been passed that might be easier to overturn. It's sort of more set in stone, so to speak. So it's harder to change the Constitution.
Yeah, and also there is quite a lot of support for guns in America. You've obviously got the NRA, the National Rifle Association, which is the gun lobby, so that is why there is a lot of people on board with them, and they believe they do have the right to bear arms. So having a politician come in and say, I completely want to ban guns, is never going to work, because they will just not be voted in.
I think some of what people do argue when they want gun laws to change is they want stricter background tests, for example. So people that maybe have mental health issues or criminal records, things like that, wouldn't be able to access a gun. And it's not stopping people from having guns, but it's just putting in stricter background tests. But even on that, why would a law-abiding citizen need to own a gun? They're saying they need it for protection, but you're not protecting yourself from anything. If nobody had guns, you wouldn't need to protect yourself.
I guess that's the thing. I mean, if I lived in a country where I knew so many people had guns, I still would like to think I wouldn't want a gun myself, but you would feel that kind of fear of, wow, so many people do have guns. So there's this kind of, it just triggers this horrible, ruthless cycle where you feel like everyone has a gun, so you get a gun, and then that cycle continues and everyone continues to own guns. So it's hard to even know whether at this point America is so far gone that it would actually be impossible to repeal gun laws and say, no, we're not having any more of this, because there are that many on the street, that many in houses, they're everywhere. It would be really hard to get them all back, and obviously some of them will be owned by people who haven't properly gone through the process that they need to go through to own a gun, because we know that does happen in America as well. So it's terrifying, but it's almost unsolvable, some would say.
And we have seen a few tweets, well, not just a few, there's been a lot of tweets about gun laws, and there's a lot of debate about it. And I know that there was a mass shooting in a school in Parkland in Florida, and afterwards the children that survived, they said, actually, we don't want this to happen again, and they set up a whole campaign and a whole movement to try to change the gun laws. They don't want the shooting that happened in their school to just become another statistic. So obviously since then there's been a lot more conversation about gun laws, I'd say, on Twitter. Just a couple that we picked out. Daniela said, "How much I hate guns is indescribable. I don't care how much you love hunting. I don't care if you need a gun to defend yourself. It puts mine and everyone's lives at risk. Effective actions need to be taken as soon as possible." I think that's very true. It does put people's lives at risk, but in this country we still have like clay pigeon shooting, for example, rifle ranges, things like that, where people can go if they shoot for a hobby or whatever, but they don't own the guns themselves.
It's mad. It is mad. I was just thinking, actually, there is some people from the gun lobby who say things like, yeah, well, there's, there might not be guns in Britain, but getting rid of them doesn't solve the problem, because look at the knife crime in Britain. But it's just not true. That's, if you take away the guns, obviously, yeah, people will still commit crimes, but they won't be as deadly as that. It's just...
Well, yeah, like you said, the knife crime that's happening in the UK at the moment is awful and it shouldn't be happening. But in the same length of time, somebody could go up to a person, stab them with a knife, and then get apprehended by the police. And that's one person that's been injured or killed, and again, shouldn't be happening. But in America, that same space of time, somebody could go up to a school, use an automatic weapon, shoot 50 people dead, and then get apprehended by the police. And guns cause a lot more destruction than a knife does.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I would definitely agree with Daniela's point there. They do put lives at risk, and without them there would be a noticeable difference. Like you said, there would be hundreds less deaths a year.
And then another tweet, Jeremy said, "This year I will start teaching my nephew gun safety and how to shoot. I was exactly the same age when I was taught. Thank God we live in a country that still allows that." Now, it's good, okay, if he's teaching his nephew how to use a gun safely, but he doesn't say how old his nephew is. But why should you have to teach your nephew how to use a gun?
It's insane. It's a Western advanced country, and he's making it sound like he's training his child or his nephew for a war zone. It's just unbelievable, that kind of attitude. And there is this obsession with guns in America, and we have seen cases where children have actually killed their own parents by accident because of using a gun. I think it was last year there was a case about a young girl who was training to use a gun, and the backfire from the gun was so powerful that it went behind her and shot her two parents dead. She's now an orphan because of guns, and it's not even her own fault. Like, why was she able to use a gun at that young age? It's just absurd.
Well, it's good that you're teaching them how to use it safely, so hopefully then they wouldn't be able to do that. But they're a child. They shouldn't need to use a gun. And like you say, if their parents own a gun, so they haven't been shown taught how to use a gun, or even if they're just playing around, they know what a gun is and how to use it, they might think, oh, I'll just go play with the gun. They can get them out of wherever they are in the household, pick them up and shoot a load of people. And it happens all the time. Children are playing, they get a gun, and they kill their friend or their parent or their sibling. And why should guns be so easily accessible?
I think there is always going to be people who would respond to what you've just said there by going, well, I'm a responsible gun owner, I lock my guns up, the gun is kept separate from the ammo, all of this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. It just shouldn't be an issue that it's supposed to be, America is supposed to be a world leader, and at the moment when I see things like that on the news, it just absolutely shocks me, and I can't think of a poorer example to set for the rest of the world. It's awful.
Well, even responsible gun owners, they might store their guns separately to their ammo and things like that, but for every responsible gun owner there's going to be people that aren't. And if somebody slightly older gets hold of the gun and then gets hold of the ammo, they can easily go out and shoot a load of people dead. And it's just, things like that shouldn't still be happening. There's been countless school shootings in primary schools, in high schools, in colleges, and all those young children that have lost their lives, completely destroyed, their futures have been destroyed. For what? What's the benefit of that?
Well, it is an absolute epidemic in America, as we can see from how many shootings there are every year and how many people it does affect. So we would love to hear from you on this topic, and you can get in touch with us the usual ways: Twitter, Facebook, or send us an email and let us know what you think.
And make sure you keep your eye out for one of our upcoming topics. We'll be looking at Brexit. Now, obviously this is a very controversial topic in the UK at the moment. We were meant to leave the EU on the 29th of March, but the deadline's been extended. I think Theresa May is looking to extend the deadline again. MPs cannot come to a decision about the way we should progress with Brexit. So we'll be writing a topical taboo about this issue because it's been dividing the nation, hasn't it, Beth?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think there's a real divide in Britain at the minute, and there'll be people, I'm sure if there's any UK listeners and they heard the word Brexit, then they will have flinched because it's caused such an uproar and such a divide. So obviously, going back to the vote itself, 52% of those who voted to leave the EU, whereas 48% voted against leaving. So it's such a small gap, and it is almost 50-50. It shows what a split there is and what a divide of opinion there is in the nation. So it's caused friction between families, friends, and there's different age groups. Some people say that younger people were more likely to have voted to remain and older people voted to leave, and that's definitely caused a lot of issues between age groups as well.
Yeah, it's such a divisive topic that I feel like if somebody walked up to a Leaver and a Remainer, for example, they're never going to see eye to eye. And there's been a lot of debate about it. I think everyone's getting to the point now where they're a bit fed up of it, to be honest. I know I am. And now it's sort of in the hands of Parliament. They can't decide what to do. Obviously, the citizens of the UK are saying, well, we should just leave. Others are saying, no, it's our chance to have another referendum. There was a petition that got, I think it's over 6 million signatures now, to actually revoke Article 50, but the MPs have said, no, we're not going to do that. So, yeah, it is dividing the nation. So it's a hot topic.
It's almost like it's crunch time now. We need to make a decision. We need to know what's going to happen and how to move forward. I definitely think on the world stage it makes Britain look like a bit of a shambles, a bit of a laughing stock really, because no one really knows what we want to do next and what the next step will be. So it'll definitely be an interesting one to cover. Make sure you have a look. We're going to be speaking about both sides. So we'll be speaking about the views from Remainers and also views from people who do want to leave.
And obviously if you want your views shared in that feature, make sure to send them in to us. You can send them to our social media, Facebook or Twitter, or drop us an email with those comments.
And the last topical taboo that we'll be covering this weekend will be cannabis use and whether cannabis should be legalised. So I've spoken to anti-cannabis campaigners about why they're so against a drug that so many view as having really positive effects, both medically and physically and psychologically. So medical marijuana has been legalised in the UK for some specific cases, but there's still this debate about whether or not cannabis should be legalised as a whole, whether it would save police time, etc. There's lots of things to be said about it, but then equally there's those who say that no, it causes real psychological damage to young people who start using it, and it's also classed by many as a gateway drug, which will eventually lead people to take other more severe drugs such as cocaine and heroin, that kind of thing. So it will definitely be a really interesting one. Again, if you want your comments discussed in that feature, make sure you send them into our social media or give us an email. We'd love to hear from you, and if you've got any personal experience with marijuana or know anyone who takes it, that would be really great to hear about.
Well, that about wraps things up for today. Keep up to date with us on social media, and don't forget to send us your thoughts on any of the topics we've covered so far or any of our upcoming topics. You can find Taboo on Twitter, Facebook, or send us an email to contact.us.taboo@gmail.com, and make sure you keep an eye out for those upcoming topical taboos about Brexit and cannabis, and we hope you look forward to reading them.
So we hope you've enjoyed the last 4 episodes of Taboo Talks. This is unfortunately our last one for a while, but we're hopefully going to be back soon.
But until then, it's bye from me,
And me.
and thanks for listening.